I think I hold a slightly contrarian view compared to most of my colleagues, or at least I like to take a contrarian position in the sense that when I see examples of greenwashing, I actually find it encouraging. Why? Because it is a
Hello everyone, welcome to the Actionable ESG Talks Series brought to you by AKFI Actionable Knowledge Foundational Institute, the world's first nonprofit industry consortium committed to bridging the gap between ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. And this talk series bring together great minds to discuss the current state and the future state of ESG, sustainability, and digital transformation. My name is Isabella. I'm the co-host of this talk series here with Manuel, another co-host, and our today's guest, John Tobin. Hello. Thank you for taking the time.
Hello, John.
Nice to see you both.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Absolutely. Thank you for being here. So a little bit about John before we start. John is a professor of practice of corporate sustainability at Charles H. Dyson School of Applied Economics and Management, the Cornell S.C. Johnson College of Business. And some of the previous title or the current title appointments for John also includes Senior Faculty Fellow, Academic Lead at Cornell CEMS MPS Program, Director of Grant Challenges Programs, Founding Co-Director Initiative on Responsible Finance, Vice Chair and Acting Chair of the Board of Directors of the International Union for Conservation of Nature, United States. And on and on. And before joining Cornell, John was managing director and global head of sustainability at Credit Suisse Bank in Zurich, where he developed sustainability strategies and represented his institution at international sustainability forum and events. Thank you, John, for being here, come along with a huge background in sustainability and a future vision of how the world is progressing. So to start our conversation, we usually start with a relatively broad question, and feel free to open up the talk in your own way. So what are your thoughts on the current sustainability, ESG, and digital transformation trends?
I could go on, as you can imagine, for quite a while on that one, but a couple things I might point out. One is how much and how quickly things are changing. ESG was a niche topic until a relatively small number of years ago, and today ESG has become mainstream, and rightly or wrongly, and we can debate whether if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But most institutions, most large institutions certainly have some kind of ESG function, claim to, or actually incorporate ESG considerations into their investment decisions. And those are just a couple of examples of that illustrate how important the topic is to the finance industry today, and how quickly things are changing. Another topic I'd like to touch on in passing is the growing importance, if you're looking at environmental issues in particular, the growing importance of biodiversity. For many, many years, when people spoke about environmental issues, particularly in the finance industry, the focus was climate change. But there is a lot more going on right now other than climate change issues. There is a growing awareness that, yes, as important as climate is, and as much as it can impact all of us, there is another crisis which together with climate, these two are often referred to as the twin crises of climate and biodiversity, or climate and nature. So the topic of habitats and ecosystems and species and genetic diversity are becoming an important part of the discussion, finally. And maybe another thing that I'd like to remark upon is the growing importance of digital tools to sustainability and ESG finance in particular, which permeate a lot of what we're doing, and about time, because they're a tremendous help and support to making better and more efficient decisions. ESG decisions can be very hard to make efficiently in a manner that is time-consuming and cost-effective. Therefore, having those digital tools can allow good decision-making, or at least facilitate good decision-making in an efficient manner. Final point related to that is that those digital tools are coming into not only financial decision-making or investing decisions, but rather all of the areas of the economy that concern us from an ESG point of view are also rapidly incorporating these digital tools. And I'm thinking, just by way of one example, the use of digital tools in agriculture. Digital ag is becoming the sort of one of the most important dominant trends within agriculture. The ability to deploy nutrients as needed when growing crops, because of course, nutrient profile of different areas that are under cultivation can vary enormously, and that ability to deploy the right amount of fertilizer and nutrients for that particular spot. That's just one example of how digital tools are proving to be critical.
Thank you. And John, first thing, just to reinforce what you said, but us as human beings, we cannot exist without biodiversity, because the biome, the human genome, is constantly helped by millions and billions of different microorganisms, bacteria and viruses. Even we think always of viruses being bad, but no, viruses also contribute to our capability to live, to be alive, to all the functions.
Absolutely.
And the other point you touch, and I would like to sort of go into, many times ESG, many times sustainability, and actually digital transformation are considered cost centers. I know you have a very strong financial background, but I think one of the challenges I hear from students in Cornell, I hear from people in the industry, is how we take this from a cost center and make it into a profit center, because no company, of course, can function without a profitability black line, right? A positive line.
Absolutely.
So the question of sustainability and digital transformation as a profit center.
Yeah, that's a huge and important trend. And if anyone ever had any doubt about the fact that sustainability can be profitable, just look at the largest automobile company by market cap today, 3 times the size of its nearest competitor, Tesla, electric vehicles. I'll just mention that example, though I could mention many. That said, I will say that some of my sort of starry-eyed colleagues tend to brush under the rug the fact that some sustainability measures, if implemented, are going to impose costs on the organization. And let's face it, there are sustainability measures that cost money or may reduce revenue. There are others that cost money up front, but there will be payback. They will pay themselves back in a certain amount of time. For example, replacing outdated, energy inefficient light fixtures for modern, more efficient light fixtures. That is an upfront investment, but it generally pays itself off in a certain number of years. And there are sustainability measures which, if implemented, are going to directly and immediately result in either an increase in revenue or a reduction in costs. So let's keep those three separate. I always tell my colleagues and students, those that will never pay themselves back. Let's face it, there's an important set of sustainability measures that will never pay themselves back. Some will pay themselves back over time. Some will generate the results we want today, and they all need to be treated differently.
And I think this is actually, you're just describing the responsibility. Let's take a public company as an example of a board of directors and executives, because let's face it, if the executives and the board wants only to invest or wants to maximize profitability only for one quarter, we know what they have to do. Fire all of the R&D, right? Close all the plants.
Exactly.
And the profit is maximum, right? Reduce all the cost to zero. And they always have to make these decisions. It's not only the sustainability, it's also digital transformation. It's another good example where medium to long-term investments need to be made. And unfortunately, many of these investments have a high failure rate. The risk of these investments is considered about 70-80% in different pieces of research. That the risk of failure. So business is about risk and reward, right? Always. And I really like what you're saying. We need to separate. We need to understand that some costs are fundamental. Some costs are hard to measure. I challenge anybody to measure the cost of their marketing department, for instance, and the profitability of a marketing department, because it's always, we always guess it. So absolutely, I definitely agree with what you're saying. And we talked before we started the talk today about the ESG ratings, and how these have to be maybe properly used to assess risk, and especially many times ESG gets a bad reputation because of greenwashing. Got to the point when greenwashing is considered as a regulatory threat or as a regulatory item, and regulators are getting, trying to sort out the greenwashing. So the question is really, how do you see ESG evolving and greenwashing part of it?
Well, interesting. You bring up one of my favorite topics, which is that of greenwashing, and one where I think I hold a slightly contrarian view compared to most of my colleagues, or at least I like to take a contrarian position, in the sense that when I see examples of greenwashing, I actually find it encouraging. Why? Because it is a clear indication that the companies that are doing the greenwashing recognize that this is an important issue, that they need to improve their reputation, that they need to come across as being responsible. Yes, it's unfortunate that those companies are doing so in a way that, if it's really greenwashing, looks good, has a nice green color or shine to it, but underneath the surface, there isn't much there. and therefore you can draw the conclusion that the company isn't really changing the way it operates. But just the fact that they think it's important enough that they have to spend time and effort trying to come across or trying to give the appearance that they are green, that in and of itself is an encouraging sign.
And sort of circling back to the previous question, is greenwashing profitable? Because they spend money, just look at the quality of the brochures and so on. So that's sort of a side question. And the other question also around the greenwashing is eventually, because you put it in the mass media and with digitalization, the transmission is instant and it stays there. We know that the internet has longer memory than people. So eventually that exposes the companies to a feedback loop, which is reputational and can be quite damaging.
Yeah.
So do you see this greenwashing actually eventually has to become the sustainability plan to some level?
Yeah, greenwashing measures. Well, let me take your first question. Strictly from an economic point of view, putting in place marketing measures that seek to make the company look green has to be less expensive than actually making those changes that that truly reflect a change in the way the company operates. Okay. So strictly from an economic point of view, not considering anything else, yeah, you could say that greenwashing is probably more profitable or somehow a better economic investment than actually changing the way the company operates, especially since if it changes the way that it operates, it will still have those marketing costs because it will want to tell the world what things it is doing. However, that's the simplistic and short-sighted way of viewing things because eventually, as you hinted at in your second question, this could come back and haunt the company. It may result in the company finding later that some of the things that it said that were not backed up by any real change come to haunt the company, and that it is on the receiving end of some bad publicity or some activist NGO campaigns. So, yeah.
Thank you. I'll sorry, I keep asking questions, but I would like to turn to Isabella to also get a sort of a different angle on our discussion.
Sorry. That was very interesting to hear, authentic feedback about greenwashing and the insights about why they're doing that. And it sounds, I agree actually with your optimistic side of this view that you think it's a good sign. At least they value it. At least they think it's a good thing, even to fake it until they make it.
Nicely put.
Yeah. In terms of the actual let's say implementation of ESG, aside from greenwash, you mentioned it might never be profitable, or it sounds like there's a lot of challenges on the road. What are the top challenges that we're facing in order to make this happen instead of just fake it?
We face any number of challenges. So you asked that question, and any number of things popped into my head at once. But one of those is an ineffective set of governments that are not implementing the kind of change that we need in the long term. We only need to look at the top carbon emitters in the world. China, the United States, India also stands out as countries that have proved very resistant to making the kind of whole-scale changes and putting in place the kinds of laws and regulations that we'll need to really tackle the problem and to make the change that the world or the global community has committed to, at least in theory, by 2030. So a lack of political will and courage, really, because some of these changes will probably be, from a strictly political point of view, losing propositions for the governments, administrations, or parties that implement them. Another issue that remains is business. And while business can be, and I think is rapidly becoming, a part of the solution, we all know that it has been and continues to be, to a significant extent, part of the problem in terms of environmental impacts and deforestation and climate change. And I actually believe that much of that is the result not of people in business being irresponsible or selfish or in any way thinking in a manner that you might qualify as nefarious, but rather a lot of it results from our political system that requires profits, and profits in the short term from corporations, particularly public, widely held corporations that are under huge pressure by their shareholders to deliver returns by the end of this quarter or by the end of the fiscal year, sometimes in ways that may be very bad for all of the rest of us in the longer term. So, but it's very hard within business to fight that expectation that profits be delivered in the short term, when some of these measures that we need to put in place may have short-term impacts, even if they result in a net overall improvement in social good in the long term. Those are just a couple of examples.
Absolutely. And actually, I think we see a couple of attempts to focus executives and boards of directors also on a more strategic thinking process. One of them being, actually, I think in Europe, in some countries, there are deferred bonuses for the executives. So they force them to think also long term if they want to get the full value of the bonus. Yeah. We've seen that in Europe. Also, on a different discussion, we see also the regulators starting to focus on materiality, like the Security and Exchange Commission. We've seen it in Singapore. We've seen it with IOSCO, which is sort of an umbrella organization, which says, look, if you continue to emit carbon or greenhouse gases, that will affect in the short to medium term, and you have to disclose so the disclosure becomes part of the materiality disclosure in the annual reports and so on. Right. So I think there are, as you said, there is progress. Maybe it's not as fast, and still the profitability every quarter is the main responsibility of a CEO and CFO if they want to continue their tenure. So that's it's very much what you're saying, but I think I see it encouraging, maybe moving slower, but both governments, the political system, and the companies are moving in that direction to start to factor in at least the major environmental threats.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's right.
Uh, we can spend hours on this, but I wanted to dive in for a second and talk about the CPIC, the Coalition of for Private Investment in Conservation that you actually co-founded. Would you want to share with our with the people listening to our conversations a little bit more about the objectives and the role of the coalition?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And the CPIC, as we call it, the Coalition for Private Investment in Conservation, had its origin in or resulted from a couple of realizations. One is that there are investors who are willing to put their capital into investments that deliver, yes, competitive economic returns, but also deliver positive environmental returns. However, there were, at the time we developed this idea, and there continue to be, even though that has changed considerably in the 5 or 6 years that CPIC has been in place, and I'd like to think that CPIC may have had something to do with this evolution. There were very few products at the time that would deliver returns and have positive environmental impacts. Why? Well, it's difficult to develop conservation-related financial investments. The premise behind a lot of economic activity and revenue generation is transforming nature, taking iron ore and turning it into steel, taking a natural forest and turning it into a palm oil plantation, etc. But conservation finance, paradoxically, seeks to generate revenue from the non-transformation, rather the conservation of natural resources and biodiversity. And that is, as you can imagine, inherently tricky. There are some examples where it, of course, works out easily. For example, the perfect example is ecotourism, where people pay quite a bit of money to spend time in unaltered nature, in protected nature. Then there's the example of renewable natural resources like fisheries and timber, etc. If you harvest everything now, you maximize short-term returns, but that may also result in your destroying or leading to the extinction, whether actual extinction or economic extinction, of a fish stock. So by managing it sustainably for the long term, you maximize long-term profits. So there are ways to invest in such a manner that generates profits and environmental returns, but in some cases, beyond the more obvious ones, it requires a lot more thinking and a lot more knowledge and a lot more expertise than many of the more conventional investments do. So what CPIC hopes to do, or does, I should say, is bring together people from finance, people from conservation, from NGOs and other such organizations, with a smattering of academics and law firms and regulators, to have that discussion of, given that we're trying to develop a product that is, yes, must be financially successful, but must also generate environmental benefits. And finance people, God knows, don't know necessarily about how to manage protected areas, and conservation professionals, they really, generally speaking, don't know a lot about business and finance. So it is only through the coming together, that cross-fertilization, that work together to make sure that both sides of the ledger, the economic side or financial side and the conservation side, are generating the returns you want when you structure a product. That's much of what CPIC has been doing for these past few years.
As you're going through CPIC, actually, I was thinking of the generational change, because I think, and I was going to ask if you have also social sciences in the mix, because this generational change leads to actually the sort of the economic view, where they say this is grown in natural conditions. No use of fertilizers, for instance, to destroy the ecosystem, right? It's using maybe natural fertilizers. It's using environmentally safe fertilizers. And you have things like, thinking of Starbucks, for instance, coffee beans, which are grown in better ecological conditions. Maybe not perfect, but again, it seems to be a bridge that generations are also crossing in better understanding the environment, paying more attention to it, and demanding products that are based on conservation of the environment.
Mm-hmm.
So I think CPIC is doing really a great job, and connecting it back to ESG. Maybe one quick question before we go toward the final part of our interview. Unfortunately, time runs very fast, but there is in companies there is ESG, which is, I see it more like financial reporting and being used outside the company, and then the sustainability, which I see it more as a process is inside the company, the companies to guide the executives, to guide the company toward what is called the triple bottom line. So trying to balance between profitability and environmental and social sustainability. Any quick thoughts on that? Do you see it as sustainability making progress inside the executives that you train in your classes at Cornell?
Yeah, I've got to say, the one thing that everyone needs to keep in mind when looking at this field, and for that matter, almost any other relatively new and rapidly growing field, is that different people use terms in different ways, and terms evolve over time. So you were setting up a distinction between ESG and sustainability that I think is sort of helpful shorthand, but may not be the way that everybody thinks about the distinction between those terms. I tend to use them fairly interchangeably myself. Maybe I use ESG more when I'm talking about investing, and sustainability when I'm talking more about the operations of a corporation and how it generates revenue. But anyway, with that in mind, I'll just sort of focus on the fact that ESG is a concept that, and triple bottom line, which is another concept that you brought up, has some inherent danger in the sense that I worry about using the triple bottom line or emphasizing environmental and social and governance issues, but especially environmental and social issues in a conversation with executives in such a manner that it may suggest to those executives that they need to balance these factors, and that the implication of which is that by taking care of social and environmental, social, and governance issues, they may have to make some sacrifice in their profitability. And therefore, that will immediately raise some antibodies. Unfortunately, for some companies, that may be true. If you're in inherently polluting or inherently nature negative industry, as it is often referred to, an industry that negatively impacts the living world and our natural resources. There may be no way around the fact that those companies, those industries will need to evolve over time. But in most cases, I think the large majority of cases, I prefer to talk less in terms of balancing interests, but rather in maximizing along those three axes.
Excellent.
Because by improving your environmental and social and governance management, and as a consequence of that, improving your reputation with the public, improving your visibility to the media, improving your relationships with your regulators, you may actually be, in the end, improving your profitability and maximizing returns. So in most cases, I think we are actually able to make a case that those things can be maximized along those various pillars rather than balancing one against the other.
So if I understand correctly, this has to be part of the strategic thinking of a company, and it has to be dynamic. It has to be thought over time, not as an immediate action, a constant balancing on every quarter or year to trying to balance all these three. But over a long period of time, you still have to reach a balance between them, because, as you said, has reputational implications, has actually cost of inputs implication, especially if you are a large producer and you consume, 20% of the world's minerals, cobalt, for instance, right? Then you have to think over how your company will survive 5-10 years out in this environment, how your costs will change. So it becomes part of the strategic thinking, which I think was one of the underlying themes today. I would like to go back to Isabella, but I would like to invite you back to, have an ongoing discussion and find out maybe a little bit more about CPIC, and we can have maybe a one of your board members also joining you and talk a little bit about conservation and how it plays in the ESG, sustainability, digitalization. But I'll turn it back to Isabella.
Thank you. Thank you for all the valuable insights and your sharing, John. And it's very genuine and it's very thoughtful, I would say. You try to cover in a very comprehensive way from different area and in a large scale, I would say, up to politics, not just from the management. So that was very insightful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. My pleasure.
Yes, and as we get to the end, I also wanted to thanks to our audience for joining us today. Make sure you're tuning in every week for a new episode where you can gain insights and perspectives on how to mitigate risks and create value by integrating ESG and digital transformation from awesome speakers like John and many more. So until next week, goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Goodbye, John. Thank you.
Bye. Pleasure.
Bye-bye.